Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar titled What to Expect in Your Initial ISO IEC 17025 Assessment. Qualtrics and PJLA are very excited for everyone to join us today. So before we get to the content, we'll go over a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this presentation, so if you want to watch it again, share it with others, or even have to jump off early and need to watch it at a different time, you will get access to that recording. So it will be available. Also, we're going to be doing a Q&A section towards the end of the presentation. So as we go through the content, if you have any questions or anything pops in your mind that you want to ask, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section within the Zoom webinar, and we'll make sure to address those towards the end of the presentation. So we have a mix of attendees on today. So before we get to the main event, I want to just give you a little bit of information about who I am and our company. My name is Karen Arriviaga, and I'm an account executive here at Qualtrics. I've been with the company for about 4 years. Qualtrics is a compliance software platform. We are specifically designed to manage quality initiatives. Organizations turn to Qualtrics when they're looking to automate their QMS. So whether this is through reducing or eliminating the burden associated with manual or paper-based systems, or if laboratories are in startup phase and are looking for guidance and pre-built procedures and content to really help them accelerate towards ISO IEC 17025 accreditation, they start looking into our system. Qualtrics was founded back in '93 when our parent company was pursuing ISO 9001. We were looking for a way to streamline that process and ensure that no details were overlooked. And so the organization started from scratch and built the framework that would ultimately become Qualtrics. They crushed their audit. The auditors were so impressed with the software that they actually suggested that we start selling it. So we did. So today, more than 25 years later, we're a leader in the quality and compliance industry. So now I want to introduce you to Tracy. Tracy Surzin is the president and operations manager of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, which is a private third-party accreditation body located in Troy, Michigan, for the past 12 years. Tracy is a managing director of all accreditation schemes and business operations for PJLA's headquarters office in the United States, as well as the branch offices located in Japan, Mexico, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Prior to this appointment, she actually served as the audit logistics manager for PJLA's related body, Perry Johnson's registrars, a quality and environmental management certification body. In support of her vast knowledge of the quality management system and the accreditation regulations, she has served on several international associations, committees, and boards such as the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation and the Asia Pacific Accreditation Cooperation, as well as in national associations engaged in environmental, food safety, cannabis, and medical science, such as the NELAC Institute, AOAC, and the American Council of Independent Laboratories. Tracy has over 18 years of experience in quality management systems and accreditation criteria, and she holds a general science and business administration degree, as well as several ISO 9000 and ISO 17025 series training certifications. So at this time, Tracy, I'm going to stop sharing and invite you to take over the screen so you can do your portion of the presentation. And Tracy, if you're talking, I cannot hear you yet. I can see your screen, and I cannot hear you.
Here I am. Thank you
There
so much,
you are.
Karen. I just had myself on mute and wanted to make sure I can get that screen going.
Wonderful.
So great. So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start out by thanking Qualtrics for allowing PGLA to join your webinar today. I'd also like to start out by telling everyone in the audience that I wish them all the best, and I hope everyone is being safe out there with the circumstances we all have going on. As an accreditation body, we are definitely busy right now juggling a lot of assessments that we've had scheduled. The good news for us, though, just to let our customers know, or potential customers know, that we still are fully operating and answering our phones and coming up with some new practices in our accrediting body to do some of our assessments virtually to avoid any delays or, in accreditation or renewals. So today, I'm going to be talking about the steps to prepare for 17025 2017 Initial Accreditation Assessment. On my slides here, and the content of this webinar was for cannabis and hemp testing labs, but I'd like to point out that the material that I'm going to be talking about today in regards to the details of the standard and the benefits, even some of the common findings, is not just for the hemp and cannabis industry, that these are actual findings that we even encounter during our routine assessments for other industries as well. So if you're not a hemp or cannabis testing lab, you will still intake and be educated through this webinar today, or even if you're a user of a laboratory or regulatory body, you definitely will intake some information today, even if you're not a hemp or cannabis testing lab. So just a little bit about our organization. We are located in Troy, Michigan, which is about 30 miles out of Detroit. We accredit primarily here in the U.S., but we also do accreditations and have offices in Mexico, Italy, Japan, and the U.K. We are a third-party private accrediting body, primarily offering 17025, which is the globally recognized standard to accredit testing or calibration labs. We also offer other programs for reference material producers, inspection, medical labs, and proficiency testing providers. We have about 1,500 accredited organizations and growing every day. And we are internationally recognized by ILAC, which is the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperations, for the work we do. We accredit cannabis labs all across the U.S. And worldwide. We actually have quite a bit of experience with doing this and have really started doing this since 2012 by accrediting the first cannabis lab in California. So just to give you a little bit of a view here of where we stand with a number of accredited hemp and cannabis labs. So the diagram I have up here, we have, as of today, 67 accredited hemp and cannabis labs throughout the United States. We have one in the UK, also in Israel, again, varying from hemp and cannabis. You can see here on the far right that, as you would imagine, most of our cannabis labs are accredited in the state of California, with Michigan being next, Nevada, Florida, and Illinois. Colorado, Montana, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania are all about the same. We do have quite a bit in the queue that have applied for accreditation that are either on hold because they're getting ready to write their system and implement, or possibly have had their assessment and just going through the process. So if I would do this presentation 1 year from now, I imagine that number would probably double. So just a recap of where we're at in the United States with hemp and cannabis labs. As most of you are aware, cannabis is still a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substance Act. One of the challenges because of that that makes it hard for us or for the laboratories is that there's not a lot of guidance. There's not a lot of standardized methods. So laboratories are forced to create their own in-house methods. So that's one of the challenges that we have. We do with that, it could drag the accreditation out a little bit longer or take them longer to implement if they did have a national method. And we do get a little inconsistency among the laboratories because all of them are creating their own specialized in-house method for testing. However, last year for hemp, though, in 2019, it was federally approved. And if you're not aware, or maybe you are, the USDA is working on some regulations for hemp testing laboratories. So hopefully we'll see some consistency among those laboratories and standardized processes. But what we're dealing with now is there are various amounts of states, whether they have laws for medical or for recreational use, that have different criteria for the laboratories. Most of them do require that the laboratories become ISO 17025 accredited for a list of tests. Some of them may not have that right now, but I do foresee that that's That's kind of the trend that we're seeing, that most states will utilize that as a baseline. Each state has different requirements, again, for their list of tests they want the laboratories to become accredited for. They might even require certain qualifications of staff and equipment. So why I'm pointing that out is because 17025, if you're familiar with the standard, if not, we'll go through some things today, that there is requirements in the standard about qualifications of staff. However, if you're a cannabis or hemp testing lab and your state has certain requirements, we obviously recommend for you to obtain your license that you would follow those requirements that are above and beyond 17025. But regardless of, each state having a different program, I think we can all agree that they really want the same outcome, is to have safe cannabis products. They want to ensure that laboratories are appropriately testing, they have accurate methods, competent people, and reliable process to detect and prevent problems. So those that aren't familiar with accreditation, just wanted to talk a little bit about really what the definition is and ISO 17025 in a general sense. So the definition of accreditation is an attestation that a laboratory has demonstrated the necessary competency to perform testing or calibrations. And these are done by a third-party accreditation organization, typically approved by ILAC. So, for example, this is what we do now. We go in, we're a third-party accrediting body, we go in to assess the laboratory. We want to make sure that they're performing a test appropriately. We're looking at their equipment, their competency, their methods, their data, to ensure at the end of the day, when we issue that 17025 accreditation, that we have a test that the laboratory is competent to perform to 17025 for a list of tests that are on their certificate. Accreditation is being used really globally. There's about 10,000 laboratories that are accredited in the United States, and about probably 100,000 worldwide. Now, accreditation, just to give some history, has been used for a very long time. Typically, it's mandated by government. In this case, for cannabis and hemp potentially will require 17025 accreditation, I'm hoping. But in states, for example, state regulatory organizations also are using accreditation. This is nothing different than what we've seen in prior industry groups such as drinking water, food, or automotive. So if you're on the webinar today and you're maybe from a regulatory sector, or you're a processor and you're using laboratory, the question becomes, why am I worried about this accreditation? So again, accreditation could be used as a way to comfort people to know that their products are safe, that the laboratory you're using has good lab practices, and you're going to get quality test results. (17025) accreditation, if you have not purchased a copy of the standard yet, but this is the exact title of 17025, it's a general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. Again, a globally recognized standard. Here are some details of 17025. It has 5 different sections. If you are familiar with 17025 and possibly were accredited a few years ago, the standard was previously 17025 2005. It is now in a transition period where all laboratories must transition to the 2005 version by the end of November 2020. So most laboratories attaining accreditation now will be receiving it towards the 2017 version, which I have on the screen. But as you're looking here, it has different sections. Section 4 is general requirements, 5 structural, 6 resource, 7 is processes, 8 is now quality management system, or before it was section 4. And then what I have pointed out here is one thing that laboratories need to be aware of is, although you need to meet the requirements of 17025, You also need to talk to your accrediting body, or if it's us, talk to us about what other things do I need to be aware of. So here is an example where it says PGLA policies or SOPs. So we have policies on our website that you need to be aware of. And it's not because we make these up per se, but we are told, because we're an ILAC approved body, all of the accrediting bodies who are also approved must add these requirements to their programs. So for example, proficiency testing requirements, that is in 17025, but we have more specific requirements listed in our policy that you're going to want to be aware of. PL2 is measurement traceability. Again, it is in 17025, but we do have some guidelines we ask the labs to follow. And the same thing for measurement uncertainty. PL4 is more for calibration scopes and how to format your scope, and work instruction aid is for testing scopes. SOP3 is another document that we're required as an ILAC approved body to enforce on our laboratories, and that's to manage the use of accreditation language and symbols. So that procedure talks about if you want to use our symbol and you want to show that you have an accredited report, you would use the PGLA symbol with certain criteria. Laboratories also can use the ILAC mark. So those are SOP 3, and really the first 3 bullet points, PL 1, 2, and 3, are something, if you're accredited with us or planning on it, you're going to want to have added to your external list of documents and be familiar with those and implement those as well into your quality management system. So I mentioned before list of tests that you're going to have on your scope of accreditation. Just to give everyone an idea, this is what we're dealing with right now in the industry for hemp and cannabis testing labs. Primarily, they're getting accredited for the chemistry areas such as potency, pesticides, heavy metals, residual solvents, and moisture, and then microbiological contaminants for various products like plants, oils, edibles, lotions, etc. So these are the primary tests that we're seeing on hemp and cannabis testing labs. Now, some laboratories that are in a state that really don't have a list of tests just yet, there isn't really a limit for you to apply for accreditation. You might have 50 tests, or you might say, I want to start with 1. And later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to expand your scope once you become accredited. So this is gives everyone an idea of the types of tests we're dealing with the hemp and cannabis industry. Okay, so now I want to talk briefly just about the steps to accreditation. So again, if you're thinking about becoming accredited or you've just applied, and this is the information you're going to need to know. So the first thing you need to do is tell us as the accrediting body, when you apply for accreditation, you give us basic information about your lab, name of the company, address, how many technicians you have. But what's going to be important is we would not want to know the types of tests that you want to be accredited for. So we need to know the types of tests, what you're testing on, what product line, and your methods. So once we have that, that's how we determine how much time we're going to spend on your initial assessment. Once you're happy with your cost estimate and your quotation for services and commit to us or your accrediting body for accreditation, the process then starts. So I wanted to point out to everyone too that even though you might have signed with our organization to become accredited down the road with us particularly, we don't make you go forward with your accreditation within a certain time frame. The laboratories tell us when they're ready. So you could still commit to us. That gets you on the schedule for a certain time frame if you have that in mind. We also do what's called a pending letter. So this has helped laboratories in the past where there are states that are looking for you to apply for your license, but just want you to show that you're going to be accredited within a year. So this pending letter gives you that access to be able to show your state that you have now committed for accreditation. Once you get on the schedule and it's set, we do send you a list of items that we need to have 30 days in advance. So it's called our pre-documentation review that we perform. So this is what your assessor will review 30 days in advance. They will make sure that it's pretty much to make sure that you're ready for the on-site assessment. It also gets them familiar with your facility. If that all goes well, we then move on to the on-site assessment as scheduled. So the on-site assessment will start out with an opening meeting. We'll confirm your test list once again, take a tour of your laboratory. We then review your quality management system, which is usually about a day. And then the rest of the time we're out in the lab. So we're out looking at the tests that you have applied for. So for example, if you selected potency and pesticide testing, we're going to be looking at the instrumentation related to those tests, the technicians, their qualifications, records related to those tests, and again, your instruments, your calibration records, anything related to the technical capability of your laboratory. We're going to be spending some time with you for the rest of your assessment. Once that's completed, we then do a closing meeting where you'll be provided with your nonconformities if you have any, and then you're given 60 days from the last day of the assessment to close your corrective actions. That goes right to your assessor. They'll let you know if they've accepted them, and then they let us know here in the office whether or not now your material can now be closed. So once it's closed, we then send it off to an independent review committee that has the same qualifications as your assessor, technically wise, that reviews the material. They don't redo the assessment by any means, but they want to look at the material to make sure they could agree with the recommendation of the assessor. The executive committee could accept or deny accreditation, in which if they deny, that means typically that there's something they have a question with the assessor about, but usually we're able to work it out with the assessor or with the laboratory to where it gets re-reviewed again. Once it's accepted, a certificate is then granted for a 2-year period of time. And the certificate will list that you're 17025 accredited for the list of tests that you've applied for. So here's just a diagram of the process. So we start out with accreditation. Then what happens is 12 months later, just because we accredit you doesn't mean we don't come and check on you again. So we do what's called a surveillance. And the surveillance is a smaller assessment. It includes the review of all your corrective actions you've implemented on the initial accreditation. We're going to come back and check to see how you're doing. We're also going to look at annual things such as, have you done an internal audit or a management review? What complaints have you had in the last year, corrective actions? And we usually look at at least one item in your lab. So it's definitely a smaller assessment, anywhere from a day to a day and a half. 12 months later, we then ask you, because you only get a certificate for 2 years, we ask you to conduct a reassessment, which is very similar to an accreditation assessment where we're looking at all of your tests again. I wanted to point out too on the bottom here is that scope expansions can occur any time after the accreditation is granted. So in this industry particularly, we do a lot of scope expansions. The reason being is because it could be, depending on the lab and what state they're in, that they did not put out their full test list. So a laboratory might achieve accreditation, but now the test list has changed. So we need to come out and do a scope expansion, or in some cases, if you've already seen that equipment being used and it's a new test or a new list of analytes that we need to look at, we could possibly do those offline. So I point that out to you to let you know that although we don't see you more than, typically it's every 12 months, we can come out and do scope expansions at any time. Okay, so what I wanted to go through today is a short summary of our top 5 common findings. So again, like I mentioned in the very beginning, these actually don't differ much from what we're getting on non-hemp and cannabis laboratories as well. But what I'm going to do is go over a few of these common findings and give you a couple of examples of the sightings so you can see some real live scenarios of situations we've seen in the labs. So here we have 5 different areas where we have a lot of common findings during initial accreditations. So first is 6.4, that's the actual, if you're not familiar with the standard yet, that's a section of the standard is what I'm reading, and that's called equipment. 7.2 is selection and verification and validation of methods. 8.9, management reviews. 6.5, metrological traceability. And 6.6, externally provided products and services. Okay, so what I want to do is start out with equipment, which is 6.4. This is a pretty big section of 17025. It has 13 different areas and requirements for the laboratories. So you can imagine why we probably have so many findings here. But just to look at what are they talking about with equipment. So this is things that impact your test results or calibration results. Measuring instruments, software, measurement standards, reference materials, an example. And the summary has various requirements such as labeling, intermediate checks, record retainment, equipment if it goes out of your permanent control, handling and transportation requirements. So I'm not going to read these all, but these are just the bullet points here is a little bit of a summary of what the standard covers in this area. So let's look at a few examples under 6.4, equipment. So this particular situation, the laboratory was not able to provide that a laboratory balance was calibrated prior to use. So the objective evidence that we saw was the OHAS analytical balance used by an analyst on 6/29/19 was not calibrated prior to use. So that's what led us to the finding. And this was a violation of 646, where it says measuring equipment shall be calibrated. I don't need to read every bullet point, but that's particularly what the area we wrote that up on. So for cannabis and hemp labs or any lab, just make sure that whatever equipment you're using, such as balances in this industry, what does impact the test results, this would be an area where we would find a problem if it was not calibrated. Okay, another example, when support equipment is found and confirmed to be out of the specification, the laboratory does not evaluate the impact on results in previous analysis. So what we found here, it says pipette number 12 was significantly out of calibration verification specifications for the 11/19/19 check. There was no evaluation or record addressing the impact on results. So here again, a pipette, which impacts the test results, had some issues there, again, sub 649. Where it says the laboratory shall examine the effect of the defect or deviation from specified requirements and shall initiate the management of nonconforming work. So this pipette was significantly out of calibration. The laboratory didn't do anything as in regards to looking at how that impacted their test result. Okay, so now I want to move on to 6.5, metrological traceability. So this is, again, a very common finding among many different laboratories to really understand what traceability means. So the definition I have up here is actually right out of 17025. It's the property of a measurement result whereby the result could be related to a reference through a documented unbroken chain of calibrations, each contributing to the measurement uncertainty. So that's a lot of words. So really what we're trying to say here is that if you're, again, this goes back to calibration, making sure who you're using is accredited, making sure if they're not accredited, how is their calibration traceable. Same thing applies with reference materials. So this is, again, you know, people get hung up on this a lot when they don't use accredited sources. Typically, if you use an accredited lab, you're going to meet this requirement. However, if you're not, or even if you use an accredited lab, and we're going to get into this later when we talk about reviewing product and service providers, this is one of those things that you as the laboratory are still responsible to make sure that the calibrator that's doing any of your calibration is competent and you're communicating with them what you want, what specifications, do you need an uncertainty? You do need to take some responsibility as a laboratory to make sure that communication process takes place. So let's look at some findings here. Under 6.5, an example that we had was timers are not traceable to SI units. And what we saw was documentation for certification and calibration data tracing back to the SI is not retained for timers used for steps and analytical methods. So this was written under 6.5.2. The laboratory shall ensure that measurement results are traceable to the International System of Units and that they use a competent laboratory. Those were really the issues we had under that section. Okay, the next example is standards of reagents used for calibration, spiking solutions, and for the various methods are not traceable with an unbroken link from the instrument to the chain of custody. And what we found was lack of documents to support traceability of the standards and reagents. So we wrote this up against 6.5.1, where, again, the laboratory needs to establish traceability. And then also under 6.5.2, where it talks about certified values of certified reference materials. Okay, so I want to move on to 6.6, and this is what I was just referring to when we were talking about traceability and the use of your service providers, for example, calibrators. But this section has somewhat, if you're used to 17025-2005, is new in some ways, where they got rid of subcontractors and combined all this into one. But they do give you a definition here in the standard itself about who we'll be talking about, externally provided products and services. So products can include measurement standards and equipment, consumable materials and reference materials. But services can also include calibration services, sampling, proficiency testing services, and assessment and auditing services. So if you're with us, with PGLA, we actually are on your list now to make sure that we're competent to your requirements. So you might come out and say, PGLA, can you send me a copy of your ILAC certificate? We want to make sure you're competent to be our provider. So this is something new in this standard that's been expanded upon. So I think that why we're seeing a lot of findings here is that if someone was 2005 accredited, again, this has been expanded, and a lot of the laboratories are missing some of the requirements in here, particularly to making sure they have procedures for monitoring everyone and documenting certain records. So that's where you're going to see a lot of the findings for this. So let's look at a couple examples. So the finding here was the laboratory receiving externally provided services from a company is not approved on the vendor supplier list. The provider of pipette calibration services was not an approved service provider. So we wrote this up under 6.6.1, where the laboratory shall ensure that only suitable externally provided products and services that affect the laboratory activities are used. So that's just what I highlighted, but this particularly under this section here under A, B, and C is where we had the issue. So the pipette calibrator might have been accredited, the report might have looked good, but again, it requires the laboratories to make sure that they're recording things, that it's on some type of list, and they didn't have that. Another example, records are not maintained of action taken to check compliance of testing supplies, and the certificates of analysis are not initialed or signed for review, opened, and receipt. So what we saw here was there was a certificate of analysis records provided, did not include the sign-off of documentation for the date of receipt, initialed or signed for review, and approved for use. And this violation was under 6.6.2, where it talks about having records. So again, like we were talking about, a lot of this section talks about show us your records, how did you validate something was okay for you to use, what's your procedure. Again, I don't know if we're really seeing a lot of people using inappropriate sources. It's just a matter of you have to document these things down. Okay, moving on to 7.2, selection, verification, and validation of methods. So this one is, like we were talking earlier, because there's not a national method in the cannabis hemp industry, this is one that could be quite tricky for cannabis and hemp labs or for any laboratory creating their own in-house method. This includes two main sections under 7.2, which is 7.2.1, selection and verification of methods, and 7.2.2, the validation of methods. So this has a various amount of requirements under 7.2. For example, what method are you going to use? So even if it's not an in-house created method, you have to make sure whatever you're choosing is appropriate. Validation criteria is a big one. So this one, we can do a webinar just on method validation, just probably alone. But, we're kind of all over the place. 17025 does have certain specific examples and criteria, what you need to have when you show us a validation package. The biggest thing, again, is writing things down, recording, why are you doing this, what led you to this, this is a good method. So this is what laboratories struggle with, but we get past it. It's a lot of data they have to create and review. So this is probably, I would say, if you talk to any cannabis or hemp lab, one of the things that they probably take the longest to implement is to make sure that they can show their accrediting body or PGLA their justification for the methods that they're using. So let's look at a couple examples. Some validation records for validated methods were not retained. So I just talked about this records. In this example, data was provided for study performed and was well organized. So the data was well organized. However, records were not retained, indicating that validations for qPCR and 3M plate counting methods were planned with specified requirements and carried out accordingly to a validation procedure. So here is a citing under 7224, where we require the laboratory to retain records in accordance to their validation procedure. Here's another example under 7.2, where the laboratory does not follow its own procedure or always measure and record critical volumes from metal analysis, which are used in the calculation of results. So the issue we found here was the SOP for metals states that digestants are diluted to 50 milliliters with ultra-pure water, whereas the laboratory adds 45 milliliters of water to digestate that is less than or equal to 5 milliliters and does not measure the actual volume. So here we found a violation of 7217 where there was deviations from a method. And if they do deviate, they have to document why. Okay. 8.9 was another common finding, which is management reviews. So I think what happens here is that there's really, it's not that big of a section. There is a long list, and I recommend labs just really make sure you're reading the list and you understand what this section is saying. So here it gives you really the criteria to make sure that you're planning your management reviews at certain intervals, and to ensure that you have inputs and outputs. If you look at the 17025 standard, it's bullet by bullet what needs to be on your input. Like, for example, you need to be talking about complaints you've had over a course of a year, for example, or audit results, changes in volume of work, complaints. And then outputs are decisions and actions taken. So I just recommend everyone to look at the standard. And if you do have questions, then we're always available to reach out to and ask. But this is just that I think organizations are trying to shorten their management reviews, and I think, I appreciate that. We do that a lot as well here at our AB, where we try to, if we have meetings, we also can consider that as part of our management review. But be careful when you do that, because you need to make sure that you can demonstrate that all the requirements under 8 and 9 are being met. And then you have to record these things. So if you're going to do monthly reviews and you're going to call it your management review, please make sure that you're recording all these things, because we need to see evidence that you've met these requirements. So let's look at a few findings here. The management review process does not include all required inputs and outputs as required by the standard and is not documented as a management review. So this is an example of a client that utilized during their monthly meetings a management review. However, if that was the case or is the case to show your demonstration of how you're meeting something, there was no inputs or outputs documented. And that was written up against 892 and then 893, which is outputs. This is the actual standard. You'll see that there's several letters here of things that you need to include in your inputs. And then here's the section on outputs. Another example was management review has not been performed within the last calendar year. So that's really straightforward under 891, that the laboratory, the management review was not done at all in planned intervals. Okay, so I've gone over all the common findings. Just to summarize and talk a little bit more about preparation for accreditation, if you're new into this industry or you're thinking about becoming accredited, just some things and some tips that you need to know. If you need to retrieve a copy of the standard, 17025 standard, that can be obtained from ISO.org or ANSI.org. Make sure you're purchasing the 2017 version of the standard. I recommend that once you purchase the standard to review it and look at your own lab at this point, if you have an established lab, to see what procedures you are actually meeting, what requirements you do need to add to accomplish the requirements of the standard. Have some type of, you need to have an internal audit before you have a third-party assessment by us. You need to know what the problems are, plus you're avoiding any unnecessary nonconformities from your accrediting body. I do recommend, if you've never been accredited before, to take some type of training. Train your staff on 17025 and the procedures that you create in lieu of 17025 to make sure you can give your assessor the confidence when they walk into your facility that everyone has embraced the standard. Learn your own customer requirements. Before you apply for accreditation, you should have a pretty good idea of what you need to be accredited for. Or again, you could decide on your own to start small with 1 or 2 tests, because those probably will be a test. For example, potency is typically a test that most labs all have. But again, get familiar with what your state wants you to become accredited for as far as limits, because we will be checking on that as well. Ask about training tools. So us as an accrediting body, we do a lot of training. If you participate in our monthly webinars, I know we get a lot of good feedback on those. Every month we do something on 17025. We have it on our website where you could download under past webinars, and you can, just a simple media file where you could use that as a training tool if you're stuck on a certain topic. We also offer in our quotation process what's called a pre-assessment to assist with the preparation of the initial accreditation. It's not consulting, because we can't do consulting, but what it is a one-day typical pre-assessment or review of what you have attempted to put in place, and then what we do is give you a laundry list of nonconformities or things that you need to address before the initial real deal accreditation assessment. Again, if you have a deadline to become accredited, communicate this with us so we can make every effort to meet your goals. We do schedule 60 to 90 days out. However, it doesn't mean that we can't fit you in the schedule, but we do have a lot of assessors that are very busy that we need to, make adjustments to the schedules. We have someone that needs to be accredited soon, but just so you're aware, we do schedule 60 to 90 days out. Right now, during this time, we are continuing our business. We are working with multiple labs to do virtual assessments to keep everything going, so it's working out pretty well. And we do have, and we'll probably plan on continuing this to accommodate some of the laboratory's needs that are in a rush situation, such as pre-assessments and scope expansions down the road. So that's all I have for today. I hope that was helpful to everyone. I believe these slides will be available through Qualitrx, and I also will probably be posting these on my website as well. If you have any questions, there's my email address. Also, please feel free to visit our site at pglabs.com or give us a call. We are all working and can help you answer any questions you may have in relation to accreditation. Thank you, everyone.
Great. All right. I am going to steal the screen back. And let me know when you guys can see my screen. Oh, I still see yours. Yes. All right. Tracy, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, guys, and Tracy, thank you so very much for that presentation. I think we've got a lot of questions coming in and a lot of comments, so I really want to get to those. But before we get to those, I do just want to tell you a little bit about how Qualitrx actually plays a part in this as well. You know, it's often that through those nonconformities and things that there's one underlying issue, and that's that sometimes labs don't have the sufficient records or evidence to prove that they're following the procedures that they've put in place for themselves. And really, that's where Qualitrx comes in. And more we're seeing laboratories turn to us to really help guide them in what they can do with automation systems like ours to help push them towards accreditation quickly, and with procedures in place that really help, you know, fill in some of those gaps and make sure things aren't missed through that process. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the portions of Qualitrx that really directly relate to what Tracy was explaining during her presentation. With Qualitrx, we have a number of workflows that you can use that specifically speak to some of those nonconformances she reviewed. Some of these workflows include like internal audits, validations, vendor approvals, equipment maintenance, some of these that Tracy actually spoke to, even management review. Workflows are ways to automate processes where each step is defined with configurable fields and routing information between different people within the organization to make sure that employees are being held accountable for their tasks. So when I click on one of these, and we're actually going to go through one for vendor approvals, it was something that Tracy pointed out in her presentation when she talked about, you know, making sure that you're tracking externally provided products and services, specifically around section 6.6. You know, are you able to gauge the stability of your providers, make sure they're meeting criteria, or even just logging some of that evaluation and monitoring and communication records that are happening. This is where you would do that in Qualitrx. So what you see here when I open up this workflow is these are the steps. You know, it's actually pretty simple. This is a pretty simplified one where we're just creating a vendor list. So you're typing in your vendors, you're doing the evaluation, and then that's getting approved. So let's just go through one of these really quickly. Novatech is going to be our vendor. It could even be, like Tracy mentioned, Perry Johnson. It could be Qualitrx. Any vendor that you have, you would bring them and put them into this list. Once they've set up step one, again, we look at this diagram. Anytime you see an arrow in this diagram, that represents an email notification and an inbox notification taking to that next step of the process. This next step of the process is documenting that evaluation. So when was it evaluated? We'll say that it was evaluated today. Who evaluated it? I'm going to say it was myself. I'm logged in as Trevor. What services or materials are they providing to me? Well, they're doing balances and monitors and glassware. Is that critical for us? Yes, it is. Are they accredited? Yes, they are. Who are they accredited by? And so you would be able to choose that as well. And then please attach their accreditation certificate and scope. By adding this, you're actually making sure that you have a record that they have met your criteria. And at this point, you want to make sure that you're triggering yourself to look at this group again when that expiration happens. So when you're looking at that certificate, if it says that that's going to expire, let's say January 2022, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to that vendor at a specific time prior to that to make sure you get all of their new information. So you can come here and say, okay, in, let's say, October 31st, 2021, I want to be notified that I need to look into this vendor to make sure that we start going through that evaluation process again. So what's going to happen, because if I hit send to QA, my quality manager is now going to get notified so they can approve this vendor. So yes, I want to approve this vendor. Yes, they are approved. Add comments through 2022. And then come here, I can either reject it if I don't feel like I have enough information. I can either approve it, or I can say, hey, I need more information. I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And what you'll see is that this information is going to go away. Now, it has gone away for the time being because I don't have to do anything. However, when October 31st, 2021 comes up, I'm going to receive an email notification and an inbox notification letting me know that it's now time to reevaluate that vendor. You know, this is one of those processes where, though it seems simple, and of course you can do it through Excel documents and other ways, there's a lot of risk for error where something will get forgotten. You aren't thinking about this vendor anymore. You might not be monitoring your spreadsheets on a regular basis. With Qualtrics, it's automatically going to pop up and remind you that that's something that needs to get done. Now, for your auditor, when they come into your organization, they might even want to take it a step further and say, okay, well, how do I know that you're evaluating your vendors? You know, how do you prove that you have these records? Well, that's where our reporting comes in. And our reporting allows you to quickly access all of the documents and all of the records that you're capturing around your vendors to show that evidence. So I'm going to run a report that we have in Qualtrics for vendors, where you'll actually be able to see information around who the current vendor is. Are they approved? Is more information needed? Where in that process are they? When is it going to expire? What are the comments that were added when we were going through these steps? Well, when were they evaluated? Are they accredited, yes or no? And you can even see information about their scope and who they're accredited by. If I come back over here, I can see that this one needs additional information. Well, let's dive into that specific instance. Why does it need more information? I can come here and go to history, see that full audit trail of what has happened, and then move on from there as well. At this point, you can see in this situation, they needed more information. The accreditation scope and certificate wasn't attached, so therefore it went back to the person that did the evaluation and said, I need the certificate, please attach it. They would come in here and do that. But this is the information that you want to show your auditor. When Tracy talked about management review and making sure that you're going through these proper steps, one of those steps with management review is making sure that you're checking in with or looking and reviewing your records. This allows you to do that and quickly generate those reports within Qualtrics to be able to meet that requirement within management review. As you see, some of the workflows that we have over here, some of them are going to be a part of our best-in-class workflows, which means they automatically come with your Qualtrics instance ready for you to use. Other ones you can create for yourself. One of the best examples of a workflow that you can create for yourself is equipment maintenance. And this was one of the non-conformances that Tracy talked about as well. With these processes and the ones that you can create yourself, it's no extra cost. We have a lot of organizations that do it within our system. Qualtrics is very configurable, and we've seen a lot of organizations actually expand their use to Qualtrics to have 50, 70 plus workflows in their Qualtrics instance because they just start to automate as many procedures as they can within the laboratory to make it more efficient and save them money in the long run. So with equipment maintenance, this is a great way to log an equipment list and then show every equipment maintenance that is tracked for that specific equipment within this workflow. Again, very easy steps, just initially listing that equipment, and then you're going to log the different times that that equipment is maintained or calibrated or preventative maintenance and so on. So I have a good example of this. I'm actually going to pull up a record just to kind of give you an idea of what this could look like. I'm going to quickly pull up a record that we have for our GCMS, and you can see all of the information and details that we've collected. In the instrument information, the manufacturer, the model, the serial number, the location, was it calibrated, When did that happen? When do I need to be notified that something needs to happen for this equipment? Again, Qualtrics is going to let you know when you need to do something and when you need to act. And then here, maintenance and calibration details. You can see that it was calibrated on 1/1/2020. These were the results. This was the information. This is who did it. Then you can also see the preventative maintenance that has occurred, when it happened, and all of the information. So that pertains to that. So again, when your auditor comes in and wants to see those records, instead of going through binders or instead of going through different materials that way, you can simply just run a report, pull up the equipment they want to dive into, and show them that full report that you have, making it really easy. Our workflows are definitely a very big, powerful part of Qualtrics. We have a lot of people that are using it. However, Qualtrics is more than just workflows. We are an all-in-one compliance management solution, and so we take a different approach by giving you as much as we can and letting you determine how you want to implement that for your organization. So document management is a big portion of our system. So making sure all your documents are controlled. When ISO 17025 mentions that you have to control your documents, making sure that you're versioning all of your documents and you're capturing all those audit details. Qualtrics does that for you. Audit and captures that information automatically so you can report on it and meet that portion of the standard. The workflows, another big part with those best in class, how you do your corrective action requests, your internal audits, all of that's included as well. Testing and training is tracking competency and awareness, making sure all of your employees are being trained and they can prove competency through different tests and trainings that they do. And then of course, all of this sits on a reportable platform so you can make sure that you have visibility into your data. That visibility is going to help you out when you are doing audit prep by significantly reducing the amount of time that you have to put into your audits. No longer you have to go out and get all of your binders together or find that equipment or find that information in that paperwork. Now, all of it's going to be at your fingertips in one centralized location, and you can easily report on it. All-in-one doesn't just refer to the way that we sell our product. It also refers to the energy that we put behind our product. Sometimes it's overlooked when you're evaluating products is customer service. And so when you're in the mindset of looking for a product to fit your needs and stay within your budget, you might not necessarily think about, well, what happens after I become a customer, And so one thing that we pride ourselves in is going above and beyond for our customers. So whether that's during the training and implementation phase or onboarding, at Qualtrics, all of our teams are constantly working. We are very lucky to work for an organization that we can all work remotely at a time like now. And we're able to maintain our customers' expectations. We have about a 98% customer satisfaction rate. Our support department is above 95% in the way that they interact with our customers. And if you ever happen to go on review sites like Capterra, you'll notice that how our customers interact with our product and what they think about us is one of our greatest strengths as an organization. Well, I want to get to some of these questions because I know we've got a lot coming in. So without further ado, let's start going through some of these and talking through what everybody is asking. So Tracy, are you on?
I am.
Wonderful. We'll just hammer through these. How do you guys do virtual assessments?
Okay. Well, no, that was a good question because this is something that came to us really over the last week when all of the coronavirus issues have arisen from the United States here, and something we had to decide to do very quickly. So some of you that have been, if you're with us, and have been accredited for some time, we do already what's called desktop assessments, and that's something we might do after you're accredited for a couple cycles, where we review everything offline. So to go to a virtual, it has been quite tricky because it is different, but we are used to doing assessments, surveillance assessments per se, like that. So what the plan is, we will be announcing this more probably Friday. I'll be doing a webinar for clients to kind of have an idea how this works and what they're required. So we have decided to continue our full system assessments. We trialed last week with a laboratory that was so kind to help us out for a few hours. What we're using is a software system, actually GoToMeeting, where we have video chat rooms. People are logging in. We look at the quality management system. We're sharing documents, sharing screens. And then the laboratory must have a camera, a separate portable camera or a portable device that allows us to conduct a full assessment as if we were there, not recording anything. We are interviewing technicians that are working, asking them to give us the tour of the lab. So it actually has worked out pretty well. We do spend, again, a lot of time through these go-to-meeting virtual rooms where we're sharing information. Everyone is on video. And not all laboratories can do it because not all of them can have cameras in their labs or don't feel comfortable with it. But for those that can do it, we are continuing. And the plan is, again, to not continue these forever for clients that are due later in the year where we don't have this dilemma right now. Those will go back to routine on-site assessments, but we're thinking about using this for, pre-assessments that we're talking about or urgent scope expansions. That is something that now that we have the tools going that we'll be able to continue on using in the future. I hope that answered the question.
Great. All right. Here's an interesting one. What makes labs choose PJLA over other accrediting bodies?
Okay. Well, no, good question. So I like whoever that was to reach out to us separately so we can have a conversation with you about our services. But, again, there are multiple accreditation bodies in the United States. Only a few of us really are doing a lot of the cannabis accreditation. I do feel that we have a lot of experience. We have accredited a lot of the cannabis testing laboratories. We get what you have going on. I think our prices are pretty fair. Our staff is fair and reasonable. I'm not saying that other accreditation bodies are not, but these are the things that I think that if you would talk to any of our customers in the industry, those are the things that, the good things that they would say about us.
Mm-hmm. And here's another one. Matt, thank you for the FYI about AOAC, but also Matt had a question around testing scopes. Is the testing scopes of accreditation only for calibration labs?
No. So testing scopes, I don't know if we're talking about the policy I had pulled up or the certificate. So let me try to address both. So the scopes of accreditation, every lab, doesn't matter if you're calibration, if you're testing, maybe you're a PT provider, maybe, so you might be coming to us for various things. Every laboratory or proficiency testing provider, reference material, doesn't matter, applying for a certain accreditation program gets a certificate stating that you meet 17025, the standard. Then behind it lists, if you're a calibration lab, you'll get a scope for calibration of all the items that you're accredited for if you're a calibrator. And if you're a test lab, you get everything listed for your test that you have performed competently to us during the assessment. So it depends on the type of lab you have. But everyone gets a list behind their main certificate of what tests, what calibrations they're accredited for. If you're asking about the one slide I had up about PL4, which is the calibration scope document, that is just for calibration laboratories. There's another work instruction 8. That's a criteria for what we require for your testing lab to have rules for our scopes and how we set up our scopes of accreditation. So I'm not sure which exactly what question or what area they were referring to, but hopefully I answered both.
Hopefully, and we've got a lot of questions in, so
Okay.
hopefully that did. Another question, and this came in for asking about Qualtrics. When using Qualtrics, where does the data reside? Is it local to the lab or on the cloud or your servers, or question mark, question mark? Actually, it can be either. Qualtrics has a cloud-based solution. It's definitely our more popular solution. It's cloud-based. You can access it from anywhere. We use Microsoft Azure Cloud for our hosting. And so you do have the ability to have that in the cloud with our hosting services, or we also work with a lot of government entities that sometimes have very strict hosting policies, or they're sometimes not even going hosted quite yet. We do have the ability to do on-premise installations as well, where it's actually going to be on your servers. I think that that's something that it's nice that we are able to offer both options, because it is different just depending on who our customer base is and kind of what their needs are. To follow up a question that had come up earlier about, online and how people are able to go through audits, I will say that we have a number of customers today that are going through audits. And one thing that they find is that they're actually able to give their auditors access to their Qualtrics instances. So if the auditor does need to do assessments, if it's virtual, we do have some customers today that are giving their auditors access to their Qualtrics instance. They give them a license, and those auditors are able to go directly into their Qualtrics instance, especially if they're hosted, to be able to see those records that they need to do that assessment. So that is something that we are also seeing from our side as well. All right. How do we confirm competence for our suppliers? Is a COA enough, or how do we know a COA is correct? And that's for you, Tracy.
Okay, so the standard requires that you come up with the criteria, so I would recommend look at that. The COA, that is helpful, where you can take a look to make sure you're getting the information that, so remember in that section it talks about communicating with your customers as well about what you want. So for example, you need to, say you use the uncertainty for your test, you're getting something calibrated, but that impacts your uncertainty. So you need to make sure you ask them for the uncertainty. So that's the criteria you're talking to them about, and you're confirming that the report that they're giving you is appropriate for what you need once you get that. But during like the contract review and discussion, you are responsible for making sure you can try to clearly communicate what you want from them. But an example of that would be also, are they capable? So for example, let's go back, if you're a test lab and you're picking a calibrator. So an example of that would be in your system, like Karen was showing you, is are they accredited? But just remember too that if you're picking, so someone is accredited for scale calibration, for analytical balances, but you have a certain range in mind. So you need to make sure you're looking at their entire scope, because sometimes we're very detailed on calibration. Say that they also do pipettes for you, and they need to be accredited for both. If you look at the calibrator's scope of accreditation issued by that accrediting body, because you required them to be 17025, for example, make sure you're looking at the entire scope to make sure they have both. They have the appropriate ranges that they're accredited for scale calibration, and they also, and pipettes. So if they don't have pipettes on their scope of accreditation issued by their accrediting body for the 17025 scope, that might be a problem. So you're required to make sure you tell them clearly, I need you to be accredited. I need an accredited report from you. I need to see your credentials. So there is a credentialing, and then you have to have some type of monitoring. So what kind of criteria are you going to come up for monitoring these people? An example would be what Karen showed you, is monitoring could be, well, I want to make sure that I get a copy of their certificate at any time. And maybe you put them on the hook to say, if you lose, you're obligated to let us know if you somehow, where we use you for balances for pipettes and you no longer have it on your scope for whatever reason, they have to tell you that. Or you put yourself responsible for checking their scope on the accreditation body's website every so often to make sure their scope still remains what they said they were accredited for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And absolutely. And I think that's where, from the Qualtrics side, when Tracy's going into, make sure that it might not just be the accreditation itself. You might have procedures or parameters that you want to dive into further. That's where we've seen some of our customers really use the configurability of our system to be able to adopt our best-in-class workflows, but even add additional fields or criteria that they want to be asking their vendors at specific parts to make sure that they're meeting that criteria for them. And so definitely some ways you can use our system to help with that as well. Tracy, how do you find technical experts in a new industry, one without many standardized tests?
Okay, no, that's a good question. So just keep in mind, we talked about, the list of scopes or tests that are on the cannabis and hemp. This is the new industry. So most of the tests are chemistry and micro or biological tests. So bear in mind, we've been doing accreditations for quite some time now. We have multiple environmental, food testing labs, all of these are done now by chemists and, by microbiologists. So we are utilizing those people, of course. And, we require, what we do at RAB is we have a section, we break it up by sections with assessors where we have specialized training where cannabis or hemp testing assessors would, need to have the right information of things that are going on, and we share those things amongst the group to make sure that they're aware of, maybe there's things that we need them to have in their assessment material versus the lab that they do for environmental that has standardized methods, that we might ask them to collect additional information and to look out for these certain things. But we train them here internally based on, what's going on in the industry. We also do ask them to participate at times, for, on certain sections like AOEC or ASTM, and to be part of those committees if they can, so they can hear what's going on.
Great. All right. Let's see, here's another one. When a lab is very small with a few members of personnel under ISO 17025-2017, can conflicting job duties overlap? For example, can an analyst also be a part of QA?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that before. I just think you just have to be careful whatever you put in place, that you don't have any partiality issues, any pressures on something. We've accredited small, 1-2 person labs, so you just have to put the measures in place to ensure that, your processes are set up not to have certain failures with, undue pressures and partiality problems. I guess I'd have to look into, if you want to email me that question more, we could talk about structural and partiality requirements. If you look at section 4 and 5, it talks about that, to where it would guide you on what's required for those types of activities. So it might bring you back to that section when it talks about your structure of your lab.
Great. And I know from our side, we're starting to see more and more, especially in the hemp and cannabis space, like Tracy's saying, 1 to 2 person laboratories, and where, yes, the person that's the lab director is also the quality person who's also doing a lot of the sampling and such. And actually, that's why we're seeing more and more of those size organizations look into our system, because usually the person who's managing quality is also the person that's doing many other things within the organization. And so what they're able to do with Qualtrics is have an assistant to handle a lot of the quality management aspects of the job, which is giving them some relief. Let's see. What challenges are you finding conducting virtual assessments, Tracy?
Well, we just started doing virtual assessments this week, so I really can't think. The only challenges I had was just, I guess, the rush to get this done and make the decision to say do it. I was a little hesitant because it's difficult. I found it difficult until I was convinced otherwise last week that this can actually happen. Licenses, getting enough licenses for all these assessments that have to go is always a challenge to get that going, and scheduling and making sure the labs can actually do this. We've created a survey, asked a lot of different questions about, their ability, but I actually am running 2 today, so I would, if you check back with me about a week, I'll probably be able to give you a better answer. But yeah, it's just going to be the overall, I think the challenge that we've trained our assessors on is, having the difficulty. You might have a hard time when you're walking around the camera in a lab. People forget they're on camera, or they're blasting through a tour where you can't actually see anything on the other end, or, people don't talk loud enough so you can't hear, so there's some things will definitely, I'm sure we will find will be delayed. So we're hoping, we've trained and given instructions to the labs about being cautious about those things, starting on time, and making sure that they, can show us everything possible through the camera. Because if we can, and we can't do a competency, assessment for these labs, then they won't be successful. So we're working through that.
Great. And guys, we have so many wonderful questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to take one more, but I promise you every question that is here will get we have that listed out, and we'll make sure that if it's for Tracy, it gets sent to her. If it's for Qualtrics, you know, we'll reach out and make sure that all of your questions are being answered. Last one for you, Tracy. You know, do you guys offer online training sessions for 17025? And this was specifically around internal auditing, but do you, in general, because I think there's some other questions in here too about training. Do you guys offer trainings?
We do. We actually unfortunately had to cancel our class. It was actually scheduled for yesterday. So we do public training. We usually have it here in our Troy office. There are occasions where we will go to other states to do classes. We are going to have another one hopefully in June when all this clears up. On-site training is we do that as well. We will come to the client facility if the client would like us to do that, where we send a trainer to you. Again, we do public courses. We do free webinars every month. We are working on a internal auditor web-based class that we're still working on, that hopefully we'll have, you know, finished over the next few months, especially with the dilemma we have going on right now.
Absolutely. And so everybody knows that some of you guys have attended some of the webinars that we've done in the past. We've had a number of them. I recommend checking them out on our website. We'll pick lots of different topics. I think we had done one specifically around validation with PJLA I want to say maybe even close to a year ago. Check these out. They can be very helpful as well. Though they might not be, you know, dedicated trainings, it can at least give you some ideas what the accrediting bodies are saying, and then how Qualtrics can help as well. So please feel free to check those out as well. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for all of these questions. We're going to digest them even further and be back and reach back out to you and make sure that you get these answers. Tracy, thank you so very much for your time and your expertise. It's definitely greatly appreciated. And we look forward to doing more of these with you in the future.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.